Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carl Leduc, and today I'm joined by Jacob Navok. Jacob is the CEO of Genvid Technologies, a company exploring the future of interactive streaming. He also worked at Square Enix as the Director of Business Development for 5 years. And today we're going to dive deep into what the Metaverse is, the evolution of interactive entertainment, and more buzzwords that will leave you fascinated and curious about the future of gaming. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 2 of season 2 of the Zero to Play podcast. All right, thanks for joining me today, Jacob. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate that on my side.
So I have so many questions. So we'll see how deep we can go in this conversation. But there's a lot that I want to touch on. So first off, I guess just keeping in terms of relevancy, there's been a lot of news lately about Google Stadia and just kind of the future of cloud gaming. And I haven't really been exposed to cloud gaming much in my just kind of day to day. But I believe, I'm sure that you are a lot closer to the pulse of where we are in the industry. And I'd love to know your thoughts on Google Stadia and just where cloud gaming is as a whole in the industry.
Sure, thank you. So the reason that this is a kind of area that's near and dear to me is that I spent most of the last 11 years immersed in that cloud gaming world. So when I was at Square Enix, I was assigned by my boss, who was the CEO, Yoichi Wada, the longtime CEO of that group who actually merged Square Enix together, to oversee the company's cloud gaming strategy. So I guess like 12 years ago, back when OnLive and Gaikai were still things, we had their executive teams come visit us and talk about. And Wada-san was very impressed by what it is that people were working on, but also saw a significant opportunity. He had a long time belief that the future of game was going to be server side. And you go back and you read his shareholder letters from 2004, he's already talking about the network is game and game is the network. And so there was a reason for that. In the late 90s, Square worked on Final Fantasy XI that became the first big Japanese MMO. And that led to a new business model, which was subscription. And that led to a new content design, which was a massive online Final Fantasy. And that monthly recurring subscription generated a significant amount of revenue for Square Enix, more than any other single game had done in the history of the company. And so that was just putting positional data on servers, right? The game was still rendering locally, physics were still happening locally. And so for years, Wada-san have been thinking, what happens if we put physics and we put rendering and we put AI on the cloud? Can we do something even more? And so 12 years ago, these first few companies come to us. They're like, hey, we're going to do streaming of games. And Wada-san thinks, wow, great opportunity. And he assigns me to look at them. And I go and I spend a year meeting everybody and come back to Wada-san and I say, actually, I don't think they're going to be able to do any of your vision, Wada-san. And he says, what do you mean? And I said, well, look, the only thing they were doing were taking console games and putting them on the cloud. Like it's just like PC game, but on server. There's no thing that you can do with AI or physics. They didn't build any of that software there at that time. And so Wada-san said, well, that's a chance for us. Why don't we begin to look at that? So we formed an R&D team in 2010. We finished R&D in around 2013, and we decided to put together a subsidiary that we called Shinra Technologies, named after the evil corporation from Final Fantasy VII. And that became our streaming, our cloud streaming thing, which everybody thought was really funny.
Yeah.
It was done intentionally as a kind of a joke. What we worked on were prototypes of what could you do if your games were on the cloud. And you can actually look at some videos we put public in 2013, 14, 15, back when this was called the R&D Project Flare, and that eventually became Shinra, where we were offloading rendering, we were offloading physics, we were offloading AI, and what kind of game experiences were possible with it. But eventually we came to a conclusion, which is why I departed Square in 2016, that the cost of doing like a full-on platform was going to be so high that the only companies that could feasibly pull it off were the big tech companies.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to understand their cost structure and anybody else's cost structure are completely different. The cost of bandwidth for Google, which owns YouTube and owns dark fiber, is very different from the cost of bandwidth for me, Jacob, who can go and set up an Amazon server. They charge like 9 cents per gigabyte for that. Google's is practically zero. And so you're fighting against a place that has effectively no cost and yours that actually has costs that you get charged by them. And so it was very, very difficult from a bandwidth perspective to fight that. But one thing happened over like this decade that we're working on it that we didn't expect. And that was the growth of the live streaming platforms. So when we started looking at cloud gaming, Twitch didn't exist. Justin TV didn't even exist.
Yeah.
YouTube live streaming wasn't a thing. Facebook didn't have live streaming either. And that all starts to grow, starting around 8-9 years ago. And one thing happens in 2014 that really kind of shocks us, and that's Twitch plays Pokemon. I remember sitting with Wada-san and looking at that, and there's 1 million people playing a game over a stream, and I go, Wada-san, this is a cloud game. It's just not the one that we thought about. And that it's stuck in my mind for years. And so in 2016, I leave Square and I start this company, Genvid, with the idea of maybe cloud gaming is really about massive interactive live events and not about playing a game over the stream. Because when we do this in Rival Peak, which I'll speak about later, you can offload AI and you can offload physics and you can do, all of the benefits of cloud, but you don't have to do it over a one-to-one stream like a Stadia. You can do it live over Twitch, or you could do it live over YouTube or Facebook. And so we started this tool company to prove out a very different thesis for cloud gaming than had been the thesis up until now. So I have very strong opinions on it. I have very strong opinions on why I don't think Stadia was successful, and I'm happy to go into that. But I wanted to check if you've got any questions based off what I've said so far.
Yeah, no, I think there's enough for us to talk about, just kind of focusing on what kind of Rival Peak has done. I'd like to kind of go there. So I like how you're experimenting with different interactive experiences through live streaming. And I thought Rival Peak, when I saw that, it definitely piqued my interest. And I would love to know, if for those listening that haven't heard of it, if you could give just like a quick premise of what that show was about, and also what you kind of learned from it, and what your next stages are for that project.
Thank you. So Rival Peak originally started as a prototype that we worked on with Pipeworks Studio, beginning around the fall of 2018. And one of the goals was to prove out a thesis I have on the future of entertainment. So I'm going to try to give this background, explain that idea, and then jump into what Rival Peak was doing at the time. So Pipeworks has been around for over 20 years. They did Super Fight. They worked on Terraria, which is really beloved, and they're just a well-known studio over in Eugene, Oregon. And they had an idea that they called Project Elusis, where there were these AI on an island, and the original concept was you would play the game, you'd buy it from Steam, and the audience could like vote on what happens to your characters, and you'd kind of play sim, play God with those characters and play alongside the audience. And they started working on this prototype on top of our tech stack. And we enabled it so that the audience could be on a Twitch stream and play and interact with it. And at GDC, which is the Game Developer Conference in 2019, so March 2019, we actually went public with this and we started showcasing that. But I looked at this and I thought to myself, why do we need a game? Like, why does anybody need to go and buy it off of Steam? Why do you need a player? What if there's no player? What if it's an interactive version of Lost? And they were like, that's great, Jacob. That's a good idea, but we're game makers, so we're going to keep working on our game. But if you want to go and tell people about your version of our game. Go ahead. And so they gave me permission, and I made a little trailer and I showed it to everybody. And Facebook looked at that in the fall of 2019 and went, we like that. Let's do that. And I
Yeah.
went to Pipeworks and I said, hey, I found somebody who wants to work with you on your game, but it's not your game. It's going to be the live stream version. It's going to be something completely different. Is that cool? And they, yeah, we want to work on that. That sounds great. So
Cool.
we put together a full pitch of what became Rival Peak. We didn't have a name for it up until last summer. It was actually called Project Truman, to be like the Truman Show.
Yeah, feels that
And
way.
yeah, so the idea was, hey, you're going to watch these characters, these AI. They're going to exist on a special backend, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But there's no player. You're all just kind of participating in watching this interactive television streams and these AI. And there's going to be a TV show, and everything that you do is going to be reflected in the TV show and stuff like that. And so we began working on pre-production of that around April of last year after Facebook gave us the green light. We went into full production in the summer of last year, around July. Then we went live with Rival Peak on December 2nd. And Rival Peak really does take into consideration all of those elements of cloud gaming that I think are relevant and important. So there's this special AI backend. There's basically a GPU server on AWS that's a super powerful GPU server. And it doesn't render the game. Like, it doesn't actually generate any image. The only thing it does is run the simulation. It runs the AI. We call that the authority. And then attached to the authority are 13 Unity instances. So 13 other GPUs, and each one is running a stream of the game. There's the home stream, and then there's the 12 characters for a total of 13. And they all take their commands from the main simulation authority. So there are 14 GPUs in all. Unless you have 14 GPUs in your home, you cannot run Rival Peak.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not a thing that can run locally. It exists because you have the ability to run those AI in the cloud. But unlike a Stadia, you're not streaming one-to-one. You're all watching it over a Facebook live stream, and you're able to interact with it and affect and impact it. So we took all of those concepts that, you know, we were inspired by with Twitch Plays Pokemon. We took all of the concepts that we were inspired by when we were thinking about what kind of new things could you do with cloud gaming, but we applied them to this new format of content. And what's really interesting about Rival Peak, if you look at some of the data we've put out there, the biggest user bases are, yes, North America, but also India, Brazil, Philippines. These are not regions that cloud gaming exists at yet, right? Like Stadia is not there, xCloud's not there, GeForce Now is not there yet.
Yeah,
we're there day one, instantaneously in people's home. Why? Because it's a standard Facebook stream. It works anywhere that works. People watch Facebook streams all over the world on really low-end devices.
Yeah,
since we could run there, you know, they could play this cloud game there. And also, even though it's kind of very high-end and rich and beautifully rendered, they're downloading and installing nothing. You know, we updated that game multiple times a week. There were new assets and models and locations. By the end of it, there's an underground city. By the end of it, our host, Will Wheaton, is actually in the sim itself and appears in the final cutscene.
Nice.
You downloaded nothing. Nobody downloaded anything. It's just a stream. You know, we updated that on the back end, and you never touched, downloaded, patched thing. So it's literally everything that every cloud gaming vendor has promised for the last 15 years, but we've actually pulled it off in a brand new piece of content. And I think that that's why it's important. I think it indicates what the future is, but I think it indicates what the future is similar to Ingress. So if you don't know Ingress, that was the game before Pokemon Go for Niantic. It was kind of a showcase of what was possible with location-based gaming.
Yeah.
So I think of Rival Peak as our Ingress. You know, the goal is not to make Rival Peak 2 in the same way that the goal wasn't to make Ingress 2.
Yeah.
The goal is to take that template and apply that to bigger things, and that's what we're going to work on next.
That's awesome. No, and I think you've proven that, like, you've kind of just rethought about what kind of experience can be created that is using the technology that exists today instead of trying to mash console gaming into cloud gaming. And that definitely feels, because it's a unique experience. It's an experience that can't be done other than with cloud gaming, and that definitely feels right. It feels like a perfect level of innovation. It's interesting because Twitch Plays Pokemon happened, and I'm curious to know if Pokemon were aware of what was happening when that happened. And it's interesting that Pokemon Go happened. It's we're going to talk about Fortnite and the live concert that they did. And it's funny because Pokemon's kind of been present in all these areas of innovation. Maybe Rival Peak 2 has a Pokemon IP associated with it. I feel like they need to be a part of whatever's next in this space.
Well, I would love to work with them if they're listening. But I don't know yet which one, what IP it's going to end up looking like, or what those experiences are. But I think that there's a wide swath of opportunities that are applicable, and a lot of places have approached us, and we're hoping to lock in a couple of those in the next couple of months.
Yeah, awesome. No, that's exciting. That's really interesting to see, and I can't wait to see how it comes out next. One area that I wanted to ask you about, and I heard you mention this in another talk, is because of how big the gaming industry is, and it seems like this is just another area that's just going to grow into its own kind of niche within gaming. You've spoken about how games are now becoming more like media, and how companies like Netflix are trying to get a piece of that interactive media pie. And I'd love to know from your perspective how you think companies like Netflix, who are such big media players, how they're going to try and step into this new interactive future that we're getting into.
So I believe very strongly that games and media are merging. And I think that the advantage is honestly with the game makers, which is to say, it's going to be easier to make games less interactive and more like media than it will be for media companies to learn how to make interactivity like a game maker, which is to say, look, I can watch my favorite movie, which is Jurassic Park, a million times, but that movie will always be the exact same.
Yeah.
It will never change. I could play a game based on Jurassic Park a million times, and it may always be different.
Mm-hmm.
And how you can create what we call the gaming loop, which is that stickiness of I play, interaction happens, I enjoy interaction, I feel growth, I go play again,
Mm-hmm.
is a unique skill set. And even if we're talking about Bandersnatch, for example, which is kind of the simplest choose your own adventure type of opportunity that Netflix has been exploring,
yeah,
that loop is still there. The moment that you interact with it, you've generated a game loop. Somebody interacts, that affects what they're doing. They either enjoy that and feel growth from it, or they don't and they stop.
Yeah.
And so there is a significant advantage that game makers have from the fact that they've spent the last 50 years of our industry thinking about these loops. And I think that it's going to significantly grow the opportunity size for our industry, because if up until now, creative directors and programmers and game designers and what have you have been primarily part of the $120 billion game industry, now they may also be employed by the 100 billion plus media industry to work on interactive television, work on interactive movies and what have you. And so I think that there's just going to be really strong demand for these places. And look, I think that there's a great opportunity for Netflix, for Hulu, for Disney Plus to interact and generate engagement with their content in ways that they haven't done up until now. They're amazing storytellers. That's what they do. And I think that, you know, my son, who's 3.5, going on 4 soon, kind of assumes that he can interact with stuff. Like, he grew up with an iPad.
Yeah.
He's used to the screen being tappy. He gets confused by television, which doesn't react to him tapping at the TV.
Fascinating. Yeah.
And so I think, you know, there's going to be generations of children that are growing up with Minecraft and Roblox and Fortnite and what have you, who They assume they're going to be able to interact with content. They're going to want interactive content on these platforms. They're going to want to have cartoons they can touch or TV shows that they can impact and engage with and talk to friends about. And so I'm going to expect media companies are going to go into this, explore it, and grow from it, because the number one thing that happens when you start to marry interactivity with entertainment is the opportunity around a new business model.
Mhm.
And I can explain what I mean by that if you're interested.
Yeah, go for it. I'd love to hear it.
So there's a reason that in the history of media, you've primarily only had a couple of models for your business. You can make it free and run an ad on it. You could sell a DVD for 20 bucks. Or in the last decade, you could sell a subscription for all you can eat content. And that's because how many ways can you really monetize Jurassic Park as a movie?
Mm-hmm.
It never changes. But video games, by their nature, because they're interactive and they're always changing, let you have a lot more business models, including free-to-play and microtransactions,
Mm-hmm.
which means that you can start to charge for things that you weren't charging for before. Maybe I'm going to change the hat that the guy is wearing in Jurassic Park. Maybe I'm going to swap the raptors with T-Rexes or something else and see what occurs.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that that makes for a better movie, but I'm just saying that you can do these things. And by virtue of the fact that you can do these things, you can charge money for it.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to start to see is applying the business models that have grown the game industry to its size, which is to say microtransaction, cosmetics, battle passes, what have you, applied to media content.
Mm.
Imagine a version of The Bachelor, but there's a battle pass. And you're going to make the decisions on what happens with others, and you're going to get access to custom content, and it's going to be affected, impacted by the audience's interactions. This business model dimension hasn't existed for media up until now, and I'm really excited to see that apply.
Totally. I actually want to challenge you on a topic. Just as I was researching, just as I was thinking about the future of interactive streaming and being part of a global kind of an experience with hundreds of thousands of other people, millions of other people, I was thinking personally how I felt about it, and I'd love to know your thoughts, because I personally feel that Twitch Plays Pokemon, for example. I remember chiming in when that was active and being a part of it. You know, I typed a few letters here and there, like up, down, and I played it for about 5 minutes. But I clearly felt that regardless of my engagement, it was still going to take actions. It was still and it's the kind of average of the, like, everyone, it goes in the direction that the majority of people want it to go. And my question is how can that experience be made as powerful as a solo experience? I guess my issue with experiences like that is I don't feel as attached, and it might just be because I haven't been exposed to enough experiences to overcome that. But is there not a risk that those experiences aren't as powerful as a solo experience would be, where I'm in charge of every choice, and every choice that's made is because of me and me choosing it?
So you're asking the question of agency. How do you feel more agency?
Yeah.
We're going to address that in the next iteration of this content, but
Cool.
There's another answer to your question, which is, if you want full agency, play a game. In other words, not trying to replace games, not trying to replace the thing that you play and you feel value and it becomes your hero's journey. I'm trying to augment that, which is to say the following. The average American watches 5 hours of television a day, of which an hour is immersive Game of Thrones. I'm paying attention, I'm watching. And the remaining 4 is I'm cooking, I'm cleaning, I'm on the toilet, it's background noise, I'm not paying attention. Video games demand your immersion, right? They require you to pay attention. In Call of Duty, if you push the joystick, you do not move forward unless you do so. In Candy Crush, you cannot crush candy unless you're tapping on your screen. Nothing happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, how do you create content that doesn't require immersiveness or skill, but allows you to engage? In other words, how can we create that remaining 4 hours of, I'm not really paying attention. I don't want to be playing a game right now, but I want to impact, I want to affect. And so we're never going to get to the place where you have full agency, because that becomes a game and you should play the game at that point in time.
Gotcha.
But what we do want to resolve is the problem that you felt where I don't feel that I mattered. And I think that that is an issue. And I think that that gets resolved through what I call the economics of interactivity. And that it's kind of like this. If in Rival Peak, every interaction was of the same economic value as any other interaction, like my vote counts as much as your vote. If there are a million votes, my vote doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can resolve that from one of two ways. Way number one is you can make votes matter because you reduce the number of people who can participate in them.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can make them matter because they were fun to engage with and you felt the reward loop. And so imagine an interaction where you are clicking your interaction and that's generating a score for you. And instead of it just being an attribution to a stream, like pressing an up button, Twitch plays Pokemon, that's effectively noise. By virtue of the fact that you interacted, you generate score. Since you generated score at that moment, you get access to XYZ shiny badge. And that shiny badge becomes proof of the fact that your interaction was there and mattered. Mm-hmm. Right? And so we can start to resolve part of these problems by making it feel like your interaction had depth to it, even though it was just one of a million people's other interactions, that you got a reward from doing so. Mm-hmm. And with that, we can also start to resolve the first problem, which is, well, how do we give you a sense of agency? And what I think it ends up looking like is a pyramid, where at the bottom, there's going to be things where it's just like, there's a million people voting, what have you. Mm-hmm. But the more that you interact, the more that you get more direct interactions. Maybe the next vote locks to only the top 100. Mm-hmm. Next vote locks to the top 10. And the next vote locks to the top 5. And so now you actually start to have agency in it. And you're getting that agency by virtue of the fact that you interacted with it. Mm-hmm. And you engaged with it. And or maybe we just let you pay and pie out the whole vote. I don't really know yet how it's going to look like.
Yeah.
But I think that through the application of both of those models, you can start to resolve that. And I think about that problem of, why does this matter to me? Why is this fun to do? Why is this interesting to engage with all the time? And so I would ask you to wait for the next iteration of content to look at, because I think that you'll get a much stronger sense about what those experiences look like with it. But I agree with your concern.
Yeah, it's interesting. You made me have a thought when you went back, when you spoke about your favorite movie being Jurassic Park, and saying that it's not like a Jurassic Park game where you can make choices. It made me think of a future where someone plays a game, maybe a Jurassic Park game, for example, and then that path that you take ends up becoming its own story and its own piece of media that someone could then watch. You know how you were saying Disney are such great storytellers, and Netflix is investing in these amazing storytelling projects. I feel like games are almost a slice, or stories are a slice of a game, and I wonder if we'll be in a future where survival games, for example, you can go on YouTube and see some people that have gone through a journey that people are entertained by just as much as they would be a movie. And I wonder if there's a story where the characters in a game can transfer over to being, a big blockbuster movie one day, just by nature of the choices that they make within that game experience. Does that make sense?
They will, and we're going to see that blurring, day by day.
Yeah, especially with the growth in influencer marketing, like influencer content and the creator economy. More and more people are going to pull in the attention from the kids growing up, and those are going to be the piece of content. Well, we're already seeing that on YouTube, and just people growing massive followings from the streaming that they're doing and all that. That's interesting. So another area that I kind of want to touch on, which I think you have some really valuable insights, is esports. I mean, that's all part of the same streaming economy that's boomed. I've seen you speak about this for years now, and it just keeps growing and getting bigger. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, because on the podcast I had a chat with Gene Chorba, who's the senior developer relations at Riot Games, and in our chat we were talking about the Riot API and just kind of where the future of gaming APIs can go. And I'm sure you have a ton of thoughts on this, but I'd love to know what you see as some great innovation that can happen from like data that a game can release to whether it's other developers or to the public. That you think can augment that experience. So I guess my question is what can game developers do in terms of releasing information out to create a better experience in return?
I'm going to have to answer this from the perspective that I have as a CEO and, an entrepreneur as a startup. Because there's so many things that you can do for hobbyists, but the challenge is building an ecosystem around that that's profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, I fundamentally believe that publishers and entrepreneurs that go after the same customers will always result in the publishers winning. And I think that any business that builds its value proposition off of another company's data and customer base is a business that's significantly at risk. And Gene's a great guy, and while he's there, I trust him. But if he leaves, right, at the end of the day, that API is at the mercy of Riot's legal and how much they really let you do with that data. So I would not build a business off of the APIs myself. I would happily build a business to sell tools and technologies to enable Riot to do those things. And in fact, that is what I do. And, would love to partner with them on many things. But my perspective is that when you use another company's data set and you're beholden to their terms of service and privacy policy to generate value, that businesses by their very nature will always try to maximize the value of any ecosystem that they're in, because that's what their shareholders demand. And so the moment that you prove that there is a market is the moment that they cut you off.
Yeah.
And we have seen this, for example, with Blizzard and Visor.gg and a couple of other companies that were building off of their APIs maybe 3 years ago for Overwatch. We have seen this over and over with leagues and tournament providers, where they'll build up an ecosystem and then the publisher will come in, create a franchise league, and cut off the rest of the ecosystem. And so, for me, it is a warning to companies and entrepreneurs: don't try to build your businesses off of somebody else's stuff. Hobbyists can, players can. That's who it is, because those are Riot's customers.
Yeah.
But you as a business owner, if you try to build off of that, you're trying to turn Riot's customers into your customers. And that's where I think that the problem happens. So I would much rather be like Epic or Unity, providing tools and technologies to enable Riot or other companies to access their customer base, than I would wanting to be a platform that's trying to build its value proposition off of their customer base.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like Riot are developing their own tools, and whether it's during tournaments, all the tools that they're giving to the coaches and the scouts and things like that. That Riot has a lot of those tools already internally, and they're probably the ones that can best use the API, that understand it the best. And but that's a really important piece of advice. So I'm glad you shared that. There's a few other things that I kind of wanted to touch on. We haven't really spoken about the metaverse, and I know that's a big buzzword that gets thrown around a lot, but I did want to just speak on it very quickly, because I think it's important to have a clear understanding of what the definition is and what the vision of it is. So just quickly, my understanding, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, is the vision of a metaverse is like a new internet where it's a different type of infrastructure that can support millions of concurrent people in in a virtual world at a time, which is the kind of thing that the internet wasn't built for. It's the kind of thing that isn't supported now, and it's the kind of thing that can change every interaction that happens in our games, in our work, and all that. Is that kind of a similar path that you feel the metaverse is on? Because this can get very, very deep and very fluffy, but I'd love to know just if you agree with that view.
I have very strong opinions on the metaverse. Your definition is accurate. That's the one that I generally believe in. It's become fuzzied by people who are basically renaming games as metaverses. Roblox is a metaverse. Fortnite is a metaverse. No, it's not. Yeah. There is no a metaverse. That's like saying YouTube is an internet and Google is an internet. Yeah. Google is a search engine on the internet. YouTube is a platform that functions on the internet. Roblox will be a place where you can spend time in the metaverse. It will connect to other worlds inside of the metaverse. What will be the underpinnings of it? Probably game engines, probably well-known social networks, probably mobile devices and app stores. It will look in many ways like what we have today, because those same companies that we're all thinking about are actively working on and are aware of this future. But the primary difference is going to be the way in which we spend time in it, which is to say, we're having a 2D conversation over video right now. We're likely to be having these conversations in fully rendered, persistent 3D. And there are a lot of limitations for the internet that are preventing this right now. If you think about real-time conversation, what we're having right now, the majority of platforms don't allow for two-way, true real-time conversation past 200 users. If you look at Google Meets, if you look at Zoom, once it passes 200, it becomes a broadcast. And so not all 200 can interact with each other anymore. A select few can broadcast out, those other people can't input back in. That's due to the functional way in which the internet is designed. Because originally it was, there is a server, that server contains static content. You pull that static content, right? And so instead of push and pull systems, what we're doing is we're treating the server as a gateway for real-time conversation. And right now it's sending me to you and you to me. And when we add a third person, it's going to send you to me, him to me, you to him, and him to you. And so it's not that we've added one person. It's that we added linearly, more. And that's going to grow and eventually becomes like a logarithm. Like it shoots up the more people that you have. And so that requirement for a real-time network and the additional complication that every person adds to it looks a lot like a video game multiplayer issue, right? The more people that you have inside a multiplayer server, the more difficult it is to kind of generate real-time interactivity. And so the more that we resolve those problems, whether it's in video conferencing or multiplayer servers, the better these things are at handling that, the more we're going to improve a number of the issues with Metaverse today. But the only medium right now that can actually scale to 1 million people and allow for interaction in near real time is video. You can't do that off of an engine right now. I can't have 1 million people on the Fortnite server, but I can have 1 million people watch a streamer play Fortnite, and those people can interact via chat with that streamer. Is it the same thing? No, it's not 1 million people all with video together at the same time, but it's close, which is to say the streamer themselves would never be able to actually see 1 million people's video. There is no, like, it gets to a point where after 100 people, it actually becomes visually meaningless. But feeling the chat, feeling their votes, feeling their interactions, etc., does have meaning, and scale has meaning to it. So that's one of the things that I've been very interested in exploring, because I think over the course of the next decade, that interactive video component is going to be one of the first ways in which we really feel metaverse-like experiences, because mass people at scale, at same equivalent of video fidelity, etc. But I think that by 2030, 2035, a lot of the issues that we have with scaling persistent real-time rendered connections will start to be resolved. I think the networks will get better. It's probably going to be even faster. I mean, we could start to see some of these things resolved by 2025. But
yeah,
if you think about it globally, from an infrastructure perspective, rest of the world, another decade and a half.
totally. Is there any use case or any kind of company working on a project that you're looking forward to seeing to kind of prove the next iteration of this? Like, I know you said you're focused on the kind of video aspect and kind of adding that level of engagement. Are there any other people, or it could be big companies like Google or Amazon, working on experiences? Are there anything? Is there anything happening that you're excited to kind of see how it plays out?
I mean, look, the network issue is one issue. Hardware issues and app stores are another issue. Assets and interchange formats are another issue. But just accessing the kind of things and the tools that you need are probably one of the most immediate things that can be improved upon. And so the company that's leading all of that is Epic. And all you need to do is watch their efforts with MetaHuman Creator, watch their efforts with Fortnite Creative, watch the improvements that they're making to their engine and to their online services, and watch their lawsuits with Apple to understand how they see the world and where it's going and what you need for an open metaverse. Because the number one thing that Tim Sweeney is concerned about is that the metaverse ends up looking like mobile internet. Right? Because the first version of the internet was very open. PC, desktop, browser, Windows, very open. And starting from 10 years ago, we began to live in Steve Jobs' world, where app stores, your ability to do anything with your hardware are controlled by either Google or Apple. And they hobbled the web internet. You can't really do with mobile browsers the thing that you do with desktop browsers. And as a result, a lot of innovation and the ability to create new things has been in some ways hobbled and in some ways excelled. It depends on your business. If you make email apps, it's hobbled because you're competing with Apple stuff and they cripple you. And that's what, the issue with the Hey email app.
Yeah.
If you're working on 3D games, putting aside the arbitrary issue that Fortnite created when it generated its own third-party payment system, Apple has invested heavily into the drivers, into the chips that's needed to run your game really, really well on your phone. So you're doing well. And that distribution has been a boon for you. If you create a game that Apple likes and it features you.
Yeah.
Right. But you live at their behest. You live at the pleasure of serving Apple. And if they decide that you're dead, you are dead in mobile. And you can't be dead in mobile these days.
And Android's open source, isn't it? Or it's I don't know if it's as open as open sources, but
it doesn't matter, which is to say the operating system is not what's important here. It's the App Store that's important.
Gotcha.
And the App Store they control the same way that Apple does.
Yeah. Interesting.
In other words, I can side load a thing onto their operating system. Am I going to do that? Probably not.
Yeah.
Are my parents going to do that? Never. And so, since there's no store competition, because they will never really promote that, and the network effects don't really work in that favor, it's the same as Apple, even though they are open source.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, no, fascinating, and you make some really good points. I've heard this echoed as well with Tim Sweeney's vision of how he sees the future, and comparing that to some of the other tech companies. I wonder how they view the future. But it seems, I guess Apple's just maybe profit driven, and sees the big piece of the pie that could be. With a new infrastructure like that.
Well, look, the question, if you're Apple, is where does the future growth of your company come from? Because companies cannot be stagnant by their nature. They must grow. If they do not grow, they die. And it is highly unlikely unless they really kind of drove their phones cheaply, that they will be able to affect Google's market share.
Mhm.
And so mobile phone growth and category growth is pretty small. And so if you're Apple, what are you looking at? You say, well, we've maximized on hardware. How can we grow software? They don't sell operating systems. They're not really an enterprise company. They're not going to go and compete with Microsoft for Office. So they're going to go and build up services, subscriptions, movies, music, games, television. And so that's where they're making their pushes. And the problem is that that's where a lot of businesses have been making their pushes. In other words, in hardware, they really only compete with Google. In movies and music and television, they're competing with Netflix, Disney, Paramount Plus, CNN, Spotify. Like, I don't know, there's a list of like a million places that are out there. And so it's a lot harder to argue as a company that you are creating a free platform for competition when you have access to things that none of those companies have access to, which is your promotional tools, the drivers, the payment systems. All of those companies have to pay you a 30% tax. You don't have to pay yourself a 30% tax.
Mm-hmm.
You achieve 100% of your revenue. And so it's just a very difficult market when they start to compete in services, because now they've moved beyond being a neutral vendor.
Mm.
And that's where they're looking for growth.
Yeah. Yeah, this kind of segues in an interesting way. Well, there's two things actually I want to talk about. First is the whole buzz that's been happening with NFTs in the last few weeks, few months. I think a lot of people have been exposed to it, and it's been in a lot of headlines. Do you see the kind of blockchain and crypto world impacting a lot of these future experiences and interactive? I suppose they're kind of independent, and they could cross over at any time. But are you looking at that at all in terms of GenVid and the kind of opportunities that could provide one day?
I have yet to see a very strong use case for the value proposition with blockchain relative to what I can do right now. Yep. Which is to say, you want to generate valuable items. Well, there was just a scandal with EA for Ultimate Team that happened, but like, why did that scandal happen? Because people were trading cards. Are those cards on blockchain? No. Mm-hmm. you don't need that technology to do these things. Mm. And so the question is, what do you need that technology for? And I think that there are myriad use cases, don't get me wrong. But I have yet to see somebody actually take what the technology can do and apply it in a way that is compelling, that can't actually be done by, for example, Steam, as long as Steam changed their policy. Yeah. And that is actually the bigger issue, which is to say, the majority of the use cases are trying to give value back to the creators of the items. Mm-hmm. But there's a reason that Steam hasn't done that up until now. They can do it. You don't need the blockchain to trace who made a Counter-Strike skin. They can trace all of that with their database. It's probably done in Oracle. They don't do that because they want to control that value. Yeah. Because as I said earlier today, companies tend to maximize value in the places that they're in. Yeah. Whether that's game publishers or whether that's Apple or whether that's Valve. And so giving the value away to creators is technically anti-value to the owners of the chain. Mm-hmm. And since there's an owner of the chain here, they're going to want to control that. So yeah. I haven't been able to resolve that problem. Yeah. And I don't think it's a technology thing. I think it's a question of how can you generate a business model that's compelling, where the value that's generated by the creators can't be subsumed by the owners of the chain, and thus they end up in a proper stalemate where they're both generating value. Mm. Which is to say, let's look at, for example, Fortnite pre-Apple controversy. Does Apple need to make games available on App Store? No. Do they make games available on App Store because other people will make money and therefore they will make money? Yes.
Mhm.
And so therefore, stalemate, both participate, equal revenue share. Now Fortnite is stronger, therefore, they're trying to fight to get a bigger piece of the pie, but that's what companies do.
Mhm.
And so up until I understand why it is that there's a significant benefit to allow creators to take more parts of that value chain, it's hard for me to understand what that content's going to look like. But I'm not trying to be negative on the opportunity.
No,
I
it makes
just
sense.
personally haven't resolved that myself.
Yeah, and I mean, you're speaking from the perspective of, big companies trying to make a profit, to make their investors happy, and a lot of the conversations in the space are very much coming from the Davids of the world, and looking at the Goliaths, trying to think of a new way to do things. And it's going to be a long time before, I think, there needs to be a project that's entirely built through the blockchain, but it needs platforms. It needs there's so much infrastructure that's still yet to be built, I think, to have something like that happen. There's some interesting things that places like
Well,
Decentraland are doing, but
the challenge is, as I said, even if you build that blockchain out and you create something interesting, the company is still going to have shareholders that will eventually demand that they take more of that value back. And so,
true.
unless you're dealing with a thing that's not run by a company, and that's, at the end of the day, that's what the point of the blockchain was.
Yeah.
Right. It was to not have a centralized resource of control for it. And the thing that always mixed me up was when you created a profit motive around what was supposed to be decentralized content. And I think that those two things are at odds with each other, and I haven't seen it resolved properly.
Totally. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We only have a few more minutes left, but there was one thing I just wanted to touch on real quick. And I think I read somewhere that GenVid kind of builds their tools using HTML5 in some areas. And I did some research into, well, so Adobe Flash closed at the end of last year, or shut down. And I had this idea of a vision of where you could upload game experiences to platforms like Twitter and Facebook through, how you can upload a photo or a video. And I started asking questions about why can't you upload a game, and what would need to change for that to be possible. And I just wanted to ask you quickly about that, and if you think, based on understanding the technology and the kind of tools that are required, is that something like a future that you can see for the creator economy, where people can share and upload game-like experiences to social media?
Well, I think that's what Roblox is. And I
Yeah.
think that's what Fortnite Creative is. But I think that's going to live on their platforms.
Yeah. No, and that's a fair answer, and I think exactly why there's so much value in platforms like Roblox, because they're taking it from a completely different angle, and they've built the whole infrastructure with that in mind. So yeah,
Look,
that's
at the end of the day, Roblox is a 16-year-old company.
yeah.
People think that they've discovered them recently. They've been around for a decade and a half.
Yeah.
Why? Because they have what's called double network effects, and those are really hard to build. Similar to YouTube, I have creators, I have audience. If I'm missing one or the other, I have no business. And so, you can get an audience for a thing that you make, but you don't necessarily have the creators behind it. And the creators are not going to come where there's no audience. And so it takes a long time to spin those things up. It is very hard to compete with it. There will not be many others who can generate that. And if you want proof of that, look how few social networks there are other than Facebook.
Yep.
Right. And they just grow so big that they can dominate or squash, and they will remain that way. So I think that you're going to have Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite Creative, and I think you're going to have a bunch of smaller ones that probably won't get to those levels, but you never know. I mean, the real question that everybody's asking is Roblox the Facebook, or are they the Friendster, or are they the MySpace? And I don't have the answer for that either.
Yeah.
Which is to say, there's still opportunity, right? There are a couple of really interesting companies So for example, the game Crata, the game Core, by companies that are going after the space, one of them could hit, right?
Mhm.
All it takes is one part of that network effect to really grow out the rest of it. But it is a challenge, and most will fail.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I really appreciate you giving your time. Before we leave, I want to well, I want to point everyone to whatever you'd like their attention to go. So, other than Rival Peak and the second iteration of what that is to become, which I'm excited to hear about once you're ready to release more on that, is there anything else that you'd like people to be aware of or take a look at that you're currently working on?
I would say that Rival Peak is probably the best example of what we do. We have other projects that are be coming out in future months, and so if they want to go to genvitech.com, there'll be announcements there. And if they want to just download and play with the tech themselves, if they're a programmer, feel free. The SDK is available and free to download.
That's awesome. Oh, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. We really talked about some topics that I don't think many people in the world can talk on with such a clear vision of where the kind of future is going. So I do really appreciate your time and coming on the show today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you
Take
for
care.
having me. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.